we've got the other boost pipe made up now, or tacked up. So the next job is to work out this near side one. Now this one's going to be a lot trickier. We've got to get from the turbo here around and then into the intercooler end tank. So we're going to need to use some really tight radius cast bends. It's not necessarily, a problem, but it's just something that's a bit trickier to fabricate rather than just using kind of regular thin wall aluminium pipe, basically. So I know the first thing we're going to need to do is modify this compressor cover. We're going to need to chop off this. We're not going to be pushing on a silicone hose like we would in most off-the-shelf turbo kits. We're going to be having a 90-degree bend straight off there that's going to be welded on. So the first thing we've got to do is take this compressor cover off and cut off the boost hose spout on the bandsaw. So the easiest way for us to get this out is just to loosen off the rear scoop, and then because the G-series turbos have got a V-band that holds the core into the turbine housing, we can literally just pull the core out of the turbine housing really easy and then disassemble the compressor cover off it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to cut off this. Now I want to cut it kind of as far down as I can. So really you wouldn't want to go much past this here. But I'm going to cut that first to that line, and then if I think I need another 4 or 5 millimeters, I might cut that bit off as well, but we'll just see how we go on. Right, so we've got that cut off. Obviously it's full of swarf, we've blown it all out, cleaned it kind of pretty well. Before we do a final assembly, it'll all be cleaned out and washed out properly. We don't need to worry about any kind of swarf getting in the turbo just yet, because it'll all be like kind of microscopically cleaned before we, not quite that clean obviously, but it'll be pretty clean. I'll leave that to Warren, that'll be one of his jobs, a bit of cleaning. So now we've got that off, we can see the challenge we've got here. Now we can ignore the wiring because that's really easy to move, but what we don't want to do is modify this headlight in any way. That's something I really don't want to do. And the problem we've got is these are the tight radius bends I was talking about, the kind of cast ones, the thicker wall. This is one I've already cut the little beads off because they weren't needed for whatever this was being mocked up on at the time. So that's going to be perfect to go on here. But the problem we're coming up against is headlights in the way. So we've really got two options. We can trim more off this and more off the compressor cover until we bring it in a bit, but we need to be bringing it in. We've got a gap here of 15 mil. We've got quite a lot of gap there before that headlight's no longer in the way. So we're not going to manage to take that much off. So we've got to either go down so we miss the headlight in this area, which we can do. So we push the compressor cover down, and then we're just about missing the headlight, and then that means coming back up again into the intercooler. The problem with doing that is then our next bend would be covering the compressor inlet, the air inlet to the turbo. So we don't really want to do that either. So realistically it leaves us with the only option being to come up. So that means doing it something like this. As Run DMC would say. So that gives us, it pulls us away from the headlight. We could probably go down a little bit, to be honest. It pulls away from the headlight. It allows us to get back into the turbo, but crucially without affecting or covering up the air inlet. So it's probably going to have to be somewhere around here. Obviously it makes it run quite close to the top, and it's also going to be quite close to where I wanted to cap the ends of this slam panel off in order to make the top intercooler brackets. And that's why I was hesitant to do all this work here and completely fix the top of the intercooler until I'd worked out this boost pipe on this side, because I knew it was going to be really tight under. So rather than end up giving myself more work by having to cut stuff back out again, it's easier to get a bit ahead of yourself and then be able to go back and be like, right, we know where the boost pipes are going to go now, we know how we've worked this out, now we can concentrate on capping this end off around the boost pipe and then making a mount that kind of works with it. So the next thing to do is going to be to start kind of tacking these together to get us. We want to try and stay the same height as intercooler. We want to try and keep it as high as we can, because again we have got the turbo inlet there. So we're going to have kind of one 90 degree bend here, one 90 degree bend here, and then basically another 90 degree bend, or something like a 90 degree bend here, and then we're going to have the quick release joint just here. So that's all going to be welded on the end of the compressor cover, so it's going to get quite congested in this area. There's going to be quite a lot going on. So yeah, I think the first thing to do will be work out, well, I'm going to cut these beads off. So I'll get these beads cut off this one so it matches this one, tack them together on the bench, probably just a square 180 degree bend, and then work out the next bend. Right, so we've got this cut down and tacked up now. We could go a little bit, if we need to, we can also still take a little bit more out the middle of there. We're not at like a full 180 degree bend as such. We've still got kind of like 5mm of straight either side. I'm hoping to try not to cramp it down too much. But with that in there now, it fits pretty good. So one thing we need to think about is being able to get the turbo out. So as I just pulled that core out, then with this in here, we probably we should still just be able to get the core out. But we also need to think about where we're going to put this quick release clamp, because it would be easy to just weld it straight onto the intercooler end tank. The disadvantage with doing that is, because we're going to have no other joint in this boost pipe, we end up kind of stuck with how we can actually get the turbo out. Like if we needed to remove the turbo, we'd have to take the downpipe off and bolt it from the manifold and then bring it out that way. We wouldn't be able to kind of bring the core out of the turbine housing as I did just then. So now it's just going to be a case of weighing up like which is going to be the best way to go. Do we need to worry too much about how easy it's going to be to get the turbo out? Probably not. I don't think it's going to be coming out every 5 minutes. But these are the kinds of things where it just sometimes helps just to spend 5 minutes looking at it, thinking about possibilities and variations, and whether it'd be better to put the clamp here or here, or where indeed we can actually fit it. It goes here, but even then it's probably going to be quite tricky to undo that clamp and get the core out, leaving the turbine housing in place. So I think in terms of just making it easy for us now, we'll probably put it on the intercooler end tank. But like I say, we'll kind of have a bit of a play around, cut some more bits of pipe up, see what looks right and feels right, and then we'll start tacking some more stuff up. Okay, so what we're going to do is We're going to go with the clamp either directly on the intercooler or just spaced out a little bit. But before I decide on that, I'm going to go ahead and get this tacked on here so that I can start getting a bit more accurate with my plans, and then I'll either, like I say, put the clamp directly on the intercooler or space it out a little bit to line it up. But so we'll get this tacked onto the compressor cover first. We've got a line on there to mark it. Yeah, we'll get this lined up. See how much of a straight we need. Right, so we've got this tacked on and back in. Now I've got a slightly larger radius bend that I've cut in half. Not cut in half, cut at about 70 degrees. So that's about what was right. And then with this kind of plonked directly on the intercooler end tank, something like that. And that there, we basically just need a piece to go in the middle. But we are going to need to come a little bit further this way. So what I'm probably going to do is trim a bit off this bead, this kind of the bead that they put on them for the silicone hoses, because I can see that it does protrude past this bend. It's a bit hard to see without a straight piece in the middle there, but it is going to need to go a little bit further that way. So we'll do that by trimming that bead off. The other problem with this slightly bigger radius bend is the internal diameter doesn't quite match the internal diameter of these smaller radius bends, nor do these bends match the turbo. So what it's going to mean before we go any further is that I've got to spend a while kind of chamfering all the inside edges of these bends so that when we weld them up, there's no kind of ridges that the air will be forced to hit. It's all going to smooth through. It's all going to kind of flow through nicely. So yeah, got to kind of chamfer all the insides. What I'll probably do is I'm going to end up most likely cutting this bend at a 45-degree angle. I'll weld it on fully, then cut it across at a 45-degree angle. That'll allow me to get in there with the die grinder and actually smooth that out completely, because probably that's the most crucial one. These two bends match up okay. So what I'll do is, I'll weld that up, cut it at a 45-degree angle, smooth it all out on the inside. I can then put that back on where I know that these two bends match up with the internal diameters perfectly. I can obviously weld this one up, and then when it comes to this bend here, I'm going to have a piece of tube in here which will measure exactly the same as the internal diameter as this one, and then I'm basically just going to have to using the die grinder sand this bend out gradually until it matches the internal diameter of the straight piece of tube I'm going to use between there and there. Right, so we've got a straight piece cut now. We've tweaked this a little bit. And we've got it to fit perfectly inside the HD clamp. Now you can see here about what I mean about how the internal diameters of these don't quite match up. So I'm going to have to chamfer the inside of here quite heavily in order to kind of smooth out that airflow. What I'll probably do to make this a bit easier for me is actually weld this on here first and weld that, and then I'll just get in there with the sanding wheel and just sand it all out nice and smooth and flat, and then we can attach it onto the end of the turbo like that. So yeah, I'll weld it round here first and then on this flange, and then I'll get in there with the sanding wheel after and sand it all nice and smooth. The next thing to do at this stage is weld that, like I've said, weld this joint and weld that joint. Then I'm going to cut across here so that I can sand all this out in this inside of this joint. It'll be easy to show you once I've actually welded it and cut it open again. That'll allow me to make sure all that's nice and smooth, and then we know that this matches up with this. We'll know that that matches up with that, and it'll all be nice and smooth then. The only other thing we need to do before we get too carried away with welding all this up is we're going to have another bend, another one of these cast bends welded onto the inlet of the compressor cover. So we need to get that tacked on. Just make sure we've got, we should have enough clearance, but we just need to make sure we have got just enough clearance before we get too carried away welding everything up for good. Right, so we've got these welded up now. And like I said, I'm going to put that in there so that's nice and smooth after it's been welded. Because again, the bend, the internal diameter of these bends doesn't quite match up with the tube and the other bends. This bigger radius bend isn't quite the same as these. So we'll need to sand all that out to get that like a nice flow. And like I say, we also need to cut across here and port that out. So I'll probably cut across at, well, I said a 45-degree angle, but it doesn't really matter. So I'll probably cut it across quite shallow, and then it'll allow me to get in there to sand all that out, sand all that inside out to make it super smooth. So then we know that these two joints line up. This joint will line up because it's the same internal diameter as this one. And then that one will be already smooth. So yeah, it'll then sit on there, get welded up, and go something like that. So yeah, next job is to cut that, sand it all out, sand this all out, stick it back on, stick this on, and do some welding. So yeah, you can see in here how the internal diameter of this bend and the kind of outlet of the compressor cover don't really line up, because at this point the compressor cover is still a bit oval. It's not perfectly round until about halfway out of that kind of joiner section. So yeah, when you cut the end off, you're kind of welding around onto an oval. So yeah, it's really important that we smooth all that out, because that's going to really help the efficiency. Right, so we've got this all smoothed out now. Probably doesn't look that smooth on camera, but it is. The finger test proves. So yeah, just need to weld this back up. Luckily, these vibrant bends have got like a cast logo into them. So I literally just use that logo to line it back up and get it in bang on the right position. Assuming I can tack it in the right place, obviously. Shouldn't be too hard. Yep, and weld it up. Right, so welded back on, compressor cover back on. Now we need to try and line up this and work out where we're going to weld it to get it bang on with the intercooler. Obviously the intercooler is leaning forward a little bit from its final position, so it's going to be something like this. Now obviously at the minute I've got these completely butted up. I'm just going to pull that out a little bit, because we don't want to like fully close up. If we fully close this up, when the engine rocks, there's going to be no movement in it. Obviously when it rocks back there'll be movement, but not when it comes forward. So we need to make sure that we have got a little bit of space in there, a little bit of a gap in there, before we actually, put this in its final position. Because like I say, if we don't, when the engine rocks forward, it'll just be moving the intercooler forward. It'll all be kind of like one solid piece. So with that there, that's going to want to be something like that, probably. Just rotate the compressor cover up a little bit. These are like the really time-consuming bits, the kind of doing the final lining up, the final kind of fit before you weld it, because you really got to make sure it's bang on at this point. So that's pretty close there. So I'll just mark it. To mark this in two positions if I can. We've got two marks on, so we'll try and line it up on those on the bench, tack it up and see what happens, see how close we get it. Right, so we've now got that tacked back on in the right place, and with the other ferrule on, we're almost bang on. It's definitely within tolerance. Obviously we've got a little bit of a gap here, but that'll be when the intercooler's in its final kind of resting place. It'll be perfect. So yeah, we'll weld that up now. Mark the position on the intercooler. Then we can take the intercooler off, drill some holes in it, tack on the ferrules for the boost pipes, then start looking at the coolant hoses. So we've got this bolted back on now, lined up, marked our holes, both sides. So now it's a case of just unbolting this. I'm not sure if I'm going to drill the hole with the intercooler still attached, with the end tank still attached to the intercooler or not. Don't know. Probably will do. Let's see that I need to take them off. I can probably just do them as they are. Then I'll weld on the pipes either side to the intercooler, and I think that's it for the boost pipe stuff. Yeah, and then it's just finishing off the mounts and doing the coolant pipes. So we've got this back on now, all bolted up, clamped up, and it fits well. Obviously getting this tacked on in the correct position was quite tricky. There's kind of two ways of doing that really. I mean, what we could have done was actually tack this end on first and then build the boost pipe after. The only problem with doing that is sometimes it can be a bit limiting then as to how high you can have the boost pipe and how low you can have it, depending on what angle you use, how high you have the piece of pipe coming out of the intercooler. So we wanted to make sure that we could have the boost pipe as low as possible. That was why I went for doing the boost pipe first. Get the boost pipe somewhere down in the vicinity of the intercooler and then try and match them up basically. So yeah, we've got that tacked up now. Obviously we've got the compressor cover welded up and that's all ready to go. So the next step is going to be to finish off welding the intercooler up. Probably weld the boost pipes, because the boost pipe and the top hat. We've got the mat sensor boss and the blow off valve port to put in here yet, but we can do those at a later date. You know, they're not really limiting us from any kind of. There's nothing to stop us putting them wherever we want at any point really. We can just kind of throw them in at a later date. But yeah, I want to get this welded up because then we can put some bosses on the intercooler to finish off the upper mounts. So yeah, we can get this welded up and then we can start looking at where we're going to put in the dash 20 fittings for the intercooler, for the radiator hoses either side. So we've obviously got this one coming off the thermostat at the minute, but we also need a boss on the bottom and we also need a boss on the top of the radiator this side so that we can actually start running some coolant through it. That's it, we've got the intercooler all finished up now. Radiator to do next, finish off those coolant lines. So if you like this episode, please give us a thumbs up. If there's anything you want to know, put it in the comments. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.